But we're going to now go into concluding remarks. We'll start with 4 minutes from Chris Mohr.
I'm so grateful for all of you to be listening to us duke it out here for such a long time. I can't believe you're sitting here and listening to all of this. Thank you. This is not a scientific debate, as I've said before. I'm not a scientist. I put on my journalist hat. I investigated the scientific claims that Richard Gage is making very carefully and very seriously, and I've concluded that they have no foundation. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, issued their technical findings on the collapses of these buildings to determine the causes and to make recommendations for safety, fire code standards, and building standards. Now they're working on designs for reinforced elevators for tall buildings that would be safer than the stairwells that were used in the past. The International Code Council, the National Fire Protection Association, they were there for that. The people I've talked to and read are forensic analysts, fire chiefs, structural engineers, MIT physics professors, controlled demolition experts, scientists who answered my technical questions on a physics chat room, nationally recognized fire experts. I talked personally to 4 different NIST representatives. NIST scientists personally answered some of my questions. Add to that the 14 engineers and physics experts who I talked to personally. What they say makes sense to me. The science and the scientists themselves all around the world are overwhelmingly on the side of natural collapse. Every national structural engineering body in the world, including the American Society of Civil Engineers and Britain's Structural Engineering Institute, has accepted the technical findings of the 9/11 Commission and the FEMA and the NIST reports. The multi-year Purdue study and the Honolulu University studies also validated the NIST reports. Even the scientists who disagree somewhat with NIST offer only minor variations in their theories. Richard Gage has over 1,400 architects and engineers calling for an independent investigation. It's almost unimaginable but possible that virtually all of the physicists and structural engineers and scientists and hobbyists like myself who know science are wrong. But let's just say that we are wrong, because that could happen. Honestly, right now, with the information that we have and the science that I consider to be inadequate, there is not enough evidence that holds up to scientific scrutiny. I have had to work really, really hard to argue that point. If you're friends, if you're a 9/11 controlled demolition advocate, and they kind of avoid you, they don't want to go through the work that I just went through over all this time. But if I'm wrong, and again, anything is possible. A lot of people made fun of the people who were looking for gorillas in Africa, but finally somebody caught one and brought it back to England. And so, that was just considered some crazy idea of us and people. But there is some hope. There are 2 things. Number one, WikiLeaks and other organizations, and WikiLeaks is not the only one, there are others that are out there. Anybody could come by and give some really, really strong information. And a place like WikiLeaks would put that information out in a New York minute. Anyone can create a private blog. The cat is out of the bag. Government secrecy is getting more and more difficult. The other last hope is actually perhaps one of those wealthy movie stars that supports the position of 9/11 controlled demolition should be approached, and I'm very serious about this, to finance some really serious, honest-to-God, peer-reviewed studies of the thermitics in the dust. We've got to start here. Some of the experiments are not complete yet. We don't have really proof of the fluorine in the dust. They didn't use, they used regular air instead of nitrogen or argon as an example in that. And so, thermites are supposed to burn without oxygen. They failed to do that. That doesn't make the experiments completely invalid. It means you have to go back and have more studies to separate out the way that the chemical signatures that you see in the so-called thermitic dust versus the stuff that appears naturally in the towers and in the World Trade Center 7. So, in the meantime, for the rest of you, I wonder if you ever worry about the absolute absence of this physical evidence and the absolute absence of people to come forth directly. And I want to ask that I've given you now over 100 reasons why natural collapse makes sense. And I have to ask you, what would it take to make you satisfied with a natural collapse theory if that's not enough?
All right, Richard, your 4-minute summation, please.
As we have seen, the destruction of World Trade Center 7 shows all the characteristics of an explosive, controlled demolition, a classic CD, a deceptive, engineered event with the use of incendiaries. The NIST report obfuscates and omits the critical evidence from the crime scene. It's a cover-up from beginning to end. And once again, my opponent is unable to account for the many physical impossibilities contained within it. We've shown that NIST grossly distorted the fire severity and duration. NIST fabricated a new phenomena of thermal expansion to justify a fantastical tale of complete internal and external structural failure of a redundantly designed 47-story high-rise in just a dozen seconds. All due to the failure of a single column. NIST failed to conduct simple calculations or experiments to substantiate their theory. Instead, having been deprived of the benefit of directly observing the steel because of its illegal destruction, they relied upon animated computer models, which bear no resemblance to the observed collapse. Of course, we are denied access to the data inputs as well. NIST refuses to release such data requested via the Freedom of Information Act, claiming that its release would jeopardize public safety. In fact, the opposite of true is true, of course. Public safety is jeopardized by the withholding of this information from the architects and engineers who need to design buildings which don't free fall to the ground as a result of a few isolated pockets of fire. NIST refused to consider the most likely hypothesis of explosive controlled demolition, favoring their a priori assumed hypothesis of fire, even though fires never brought down a high-rise, and every high-rise that has been brought down by explosive controlled demolition. In fact, NIST does not explain the free fall of World Trade Center 7, which they had admitted to earlier, nor have they acknowledged the obvious implication that the supporting structural columns had to have been removed virtually simultaneously. How can this be accomplished by fire? NIST neglected to test for thermite incendiaries in the debris, even though the National Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigation, NFPA 921, requires investigation of explosives given all the evidence of extreme temperatures not accounted for by office fires. Evidence like the dozens of credible reports of molten iron or steel in the debris pile, evidence like the critically important forensic documentation by FEMA in Appendix C of the only piece of Building 7 that was saved from its illegal destruction, melted steel beams, which NIST censored from their final report. In short, NIST's official technical explanation is inconsistent with the evidence and the basic laws of physics. By contrast, the hypothesis of explosive controlled demolition is consistent with all of the available evidence and the laws of physics. Under the prescription of the scientific method, we have no choice but to abandon the official account provided by NIST and to insist on a new investigation which accounts for all of the evidence, has subpoena power, where testimony is also taken under oath. After all, 9/11 was the precipitating event that sent us into two wars, in which already over 1 million people have perished. We must be absolutely certain about it. I call upon my opponent tonight and upon all Americans to join with the 1,450 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth in this historic cause. And I encourage you to review the evidence available on our DVDs and online at ae911truth.org, to sign our petition and put a strong voice to your conscience by speaking out to your friends, colleagues, government and media representatives. Act with courage today.
Well, this concludes our second segment. And what do you say about our two presenters? Certainly, they've put up a great presentation.
Thanks, you guys.
You have been listening to 9/11 Debate, Collapse by Fire or Explosive Controlled Demolition, featuring Chris Mohr and Richard Gage, AIA. This event was brought to you by Colorado 9/11 Visibility, colorado911visibility.org. Additional support provided by generous donations from our supporters, whom we gratefully thank.